Sometimes a story begins not with a sound, but with the absence of one. In a world filled with crashing waves, laughter, and music, one little girl lived in complete silence until a single moment changed the course of her life forever. What happened inside that coastal mansion stunned everyone who witnessed it, and it all began on an ordinary night when two very different lives crossed paths in the most unexpected way. Before we start, if you love emotional healing stories that touch the heart, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring more stories like this to you, and you won't miss what comes next. Now, let's begin. The night began with sound, rich, layered, hypnotic sound. There was the soft tremble of crystal glasses touching the low thrum of a jazz quartet warming up, and the distant roar of waves rolling against the private shore of the Ward oceanfront resort. Every note floated through the marble halls like a promise of luxury. Guests murmured, laughed, toasted. The world felt alive, rhythmic, full. Then everything cut to black. Not the lights, not the music, the sound itself. The shift was so sudden it felt violent. One moment the party breathed in harmony, and the next, silence fell like a curtain, thick, absolute, unnatural. And inside that silence stood an 8-year-old girl in a white dress, breaths trembling in her chest. Sophie Ward watched mouths moving, waiters greeting guests, a violinist adjusting her bow, her mother speaking to a manager, but she heard nothing. Not a single tone. Not even the faint hum of space that most people take for granted. She only felt the weight of the world moving without her, a choreography she could see but never join. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sketchbook. She tried not to panic. Not again. Not here. She forced herself to breathe slow and steady the way her speech therapist taught her. Silence wasn't new to her, but tonight it felt heavier. She lifted her eyes toward the glass wall of the ballroom. Beyond it, waves rolled and crashed, stirring white foam beneath the moonlight. Sophie pressed her palm to the cool surface. She couldn't hear the ocean, but she felt the vibration, soft, pulsing, familiar. The sea was the only place she didn't feel abandoned by the world. On the other side of the ballroom, Helena Ward, billionaire CEO and tonight's dazzling host, lifted a champagne flute to greet a foreign investor. Her expression was practiced perfection. A poised smile, eyes sharp with intelligence, posture honed by years of boardrooms and headlines. But the moment her gaze drifted toward her daughter by the glass wall, her smile cracked just a fraction. Helena excused herself, heels tapping lightly as she crossed the room. "Sweetheart," she murmured, though she knew Sophie couldn't hear her. She touched her daughter's shoulder gently. Sophie turned. Her lips formed a small, polite smile, the kind that always squeezed Helena's chest with guilt. She should be hearing laughter right now, Helena thought. She should be hearing the music, the ocean, my voice. Anything. But her little girl lived in a world without sound. A world Helena believed she had somehow given her. The memory struck before she had a chance to push it away. 8 years earlier, hospital monitors beeping, medical staff rushing, the sterile smell of antiseptic thick in the air. Helena lay in a delivery room, exhausted, heart pounding in fear and hope as her newborn daughter was whisked away for tests. The attending physician entered with a tight mouth and lowered eyes. "There's something you need to prepare yourself for," he said gently. "Your daughter's hearing. There are significant abnormalities. Quite possibly congenital. Mrs. Ward, she may never hear anything." Helena remembered how the words sliced through her cold, merciless absolute. The faint beep of the monitor had grown louder, louder until it became the soundtrack of her nightmares. For months afterward, she'd wake at night hearing phantom alarms, imagining doctors repeating the phrase "born deaf" over and over. And now, 8 years later, the guilt still lived in her. It clung to her like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. The world saw Helena as a titan, an iron-willed businesswoman who built a hospitality empire across 3 continents. But Helena knew a quieter truth. All her power, all her wealth, none of it helped her unlock the simple miracle of sound for her child. She hired specialists from Switzerland, Japan, Boston. She paid for experimental devices, state-of-the-art scans, training therapies. Each time the conclusion was the same: irreversible, congenital, born deaf. Sophie tugged at the sleeve of Helena's gown. Her small hand shaped a sign. "Are you okay?" Helena forced a smile and signed back, "Always when you're beside me." But the truth echoed inside her. "I'm terrified every minute." As she guided Sophie toward the quieter side of the ballroom, the resort's operations manager rushed in, tablet in hand, whispering something urgent. Helena's expression shifted. Concern. Annoyance. It was hard to tell. Her emotional walls were legendary. "Just handle it," she answered softly. "Tonight needs to be perfect." But the manager shook his head. "You need to know, ma'am. The night shift maintenance hire just checked in. The new janitor." Helena arched an eyebrow. "We hired a new one." "Already, yes." HR pushed it through quickly to cover the evening outages. "His name is Jake Coleman." The name meant nothing to her. Another worker in a blue uniform. Another stranger in her world of polished surfaces and flawless expectations. But Sophie's head turned. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, curious. Helena didn't notice. She was too busy rehearsing the same silent prayer she carried every day. "Please let me find a way for my daughter to hear. Let me fix what I failed to protect." From the corridor behind them came a sound audible only to the audience: a heavy door opening, boots stepping onto polished stone, and the soft jingle of a tool belt. The kind of sounds Sophie should have heard. The kind of sounds that would soon change everything. Helena exhaled slowly, unaware her life had just intersected with a man who would rewrite her daughter's future. And in that moment, with the ocean rumbling far below and the silent world pressing in on all sides, the stage was set. As the ballroom murmured on, Sophie turned her head sharply, not because she heard something, but because she felt a vibration that didn't belong to the ocean. A vibration traveling through the floorboards. Her hand tightened on her sketchbook. At the far end of the hall, unseen by both mother and child, the janitor in blue closed the maintenance door behind him, and the faint echo of metal against metal pulsed through the silent world of a girl who was never meant to hear anything at all. The storm outside hadn't arrived yet, but something in the air felt charged like a low hum beneath the surface of the resort. Jake Coleman stepped through the staff entrance boots, damp from ocean mist, a canvas tool bag slung over his shoulder. Each footstep echoed softly down the polished hallway, traveling farther than he intended. He paused, exhaled, and tightened his grip on the strap. First day. Don't mess this up. The uniform navy blue stiff from industrial washing felt foreign on his skin. He'd once worn heavy protective gear helmets, belts full of insulated tools. He'd been an industrial electrician, the guy companies called when a building was failing and panic filled the air. But that life died with the woman he loved. 8 years earlier, a warehouse fire had swallowed the night. A faulty alarm system ignored by the building owners. A cascade of negligence. By the time Jake reached the site, flames were already ripping through the roof. His wife Emily had been inside doing overtime data work. They called the fire an accident. Jake called it a theft, one that stole his wife, stole his future, and stole any faith he had in responsibility from people with money. He had walked away from the field after that. Too much pain, too much anger, too many nights hearing alarms in his dreams. Now he pushed a mop, fixed loose wires, cleaned up other people's messes. It paid enough to keep him renting a small apartment and almost enough to fight for shared custody of his son, Max, a 10-year-old with the kindest heart Jake had ever known. Tonight's shift meant more money, more hours, another tiny step toward bringing Max home. Jake walked farther down the hallway and approached the ballroom. The glow from the event spilled out in golden streaks. Laughter music and clinking glasses mixed in a blur of distant noise. He didn't plan to get anywhere near the guests. He just needed to reach the service panel at the back, check the flickering lights the manager had complained about, and stay invisible. But fate had different timing. As he rounded the corner, a metallic clatter split the quiet, sharp piercing unmistakable. His wrench slid from the side pouch and crashed onto the hardwood floor. The sound cracked through the hallway like a shot. "Damn it," he muttered, kneeling to grab it. But then he froze. A small figure stood at the far end of the corridor, the little girl from earlier. Sophie. Her hand flew to her right ear, her face tightening in discomfort. Not confusion, not surprise. Pain. Jake blinked. "Wait." He breathed, staring at her. She felt that even from a distance he could see her shoulders tense. Her free hand pressed against the wall, searching for something steady. Her eyes darted toward him, curious, not frightened. She watched his mouth move, though she couldn't hear his apology. Jake raised a hand awkwardly and mouthed, "Sorry." She studied him with a quiet intelligence he hadn't expected. Then she did something that made his throat tighten. She gave a tiny nod as if forgiving him instantly. Before he could say anything else, her tutor called her back, guiding her into a quieter study room. Sophie paused in the doorway, glancing at him once more, then disappeared. Jake exhaled slowly. If she's completely deaf, why did she react like that? He tried to shake the thought. It wasn't his place. He was a janitor in a borrowed uniform. The girl was the daughter of a billionaire. Her medical team probably had more degrees than he had tools. Still, the reaction wasn't normal. It nagged at him like a loose live wire hidden behind drywall. Later, in the employee break room, Jake dialed Max during his short break. The boy answered on the second ring. "Dad." Just hearing that voice softened every line in Jake's face. "Hey, buddy, you still up? I was drawing. Grandma let me stay awake 'cause I told her you might call." Jake smiled. "Yeah, what are you drawing this time?" "A dog on a skateboard. With sunglasses." Jake laughed quiet warm. "That sounds awesome, actually." Max giggled, then asked, "How's your new job? Did you fix anything cool yet?" Jake hesitated. "Not exactly. But I did meet someone. A worker, a kid, a girl. About your age. She's deaf." There was a pause. Then Max said, "Like can't hear anything at all." "That's what I'm told." Jake rubbed the bridge of his nose. "But something weird happened. I dropped a wrench and she reacted. Like it hurt her." Max hummed thoughtfully. "Remember when the doctor thought I had hearing loss? But it was just that stupid cotton swab stuck in my ear." Jake felt something shift inside his chest. A tiny connection. A thread. He tried to dismiss it. "Yeah, but that was different. This girl, her doctors say she was born." Still Max interrupted gently. "Maybe you saw something they didn't." Jake swallowed. "Or maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see." They said goodnight, but the boy's words stayed with him. Hours passed. Jake finished repairing a faulty dimmer switch, cleaned 2 hallways, and performed routine checks on the emergency lights. The resort had settled into late-night quiet soft waves outside, faint hums of machinery inside. As he approached the family wing, another sound caught him off guard, not loud, but persistent. A soft, repetitive scritch, scritch, scritch. He followed it, drawn by instinct. Through the cracked door of a small art studio, he saw Sophie sitting cross-legged on the floor. Her sketchbook lay open. A pencil moved quickly across the page. He held his breath and leaned slightly to get a better angle. She wasn't drawing flowers or houses or ocean waves. She was drawing an ear, a right ear, surrounded by swirling black loops like coils of pain. She pressed her palm against her ear between each stroke, flinching lightly. Her pencil moved faster, harder, as if trying to warn anyone about a storm inside her head. The scritch, scritch, scritch of graphite scraped through the quiet like Morse code. Jake's voice escaped in a whisper. "She's telling someone her ear hurts." Sophie didn't hear him, but her pencil slowed. She glanced toward the door, almost sensing someone there. Jake stepped back, not wanting to frighten her, but his heart was pounding. Something was wrong in a way no one had bothered to question. And for the first time since he stepped into the Ward estate, Jake felt a spark of the man he used to be, the one who refused to ignore danger just because someone richer said everything's fine. He couldn't diagnose anything. He couldn't promise anything. But he knew what he'd seen. And he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This child was not telling the world she was deaf. She was telling the world she was hurting. Jake stared at the door long after Sophie stopped drawing. The ocean rumbled outside. Somewhere deep inside, the estate lights flickered again. The girl who wasn't supposed to hear anything had reacted to sound, and the girl who wasn't supposed to feel pain from it was now drawing it. Jake whispered to himself, voice tight with conviction. This isn't just deafness. Something's been wrong for a long, long time. The next morning, the resort woke to the low hum of vacuum cleaners, the clink of breakfast dishes, and the muffled rush of ocean wind pressing against the glass. Staff moved quietly, trying not to disturb the high-end guests enjoying their seaside sleep-in. Jake moved differently. He walked the service corridor with purpose tool belts slung low, mind buzzing louder than any generator he'd ever repaired. All night, the same images had replayed in his head, Sophie flinching at the crash of his wrench. Her hand pressed to her right ear. That sketch and ear ringed in black pain. Every time he tried to shrug it off, something inside him refused. It felt too much like that warehouse alarm system, everyone insisting it was fine until it wasn't. Until it was too late. He wasn't going to stand by and watch another child pay for adults looking the other way. His first stop wasn't the electrical room. It was the small office where Sophie's interpreter usually worked. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. Hey, excuse me? The interpreter, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and quick hands, looked up from her laptop. Can I help you? I'm Jake, he said, tapping the name patch on his uniform. New maintenance. I've seen you with Sophie. Her expression softened. You've met her. Kind of, he said. Mostly from a distance. I was wondering if you could show me a few signs. She tilted her head. For work reasons or... Jake exhaled. For her. I don't want to bother her with my voice if she can't use it. I just want to say simple things. I'm sorry. Thank you. Are you in pain? That kind of stuff. Something in his tone must have reached her. She closed the laptop gently. All right, she said. We've got 10 minutes before her lesson. She stood and showed him slowly, patiently. Sorry, she said, drawing a small circle over her chest with one fist. Thank you. A hand from chin outward. Pain, 2 fingers twisting toward each other like a small lightning strike. Ear. She touched the side of her head. Then you can point right or left. Jake mirrored her, his rough hands careful, almost reverent. The shapes felt strange and powerful at the same time, like tools for a different kind of repair. The interpreter watched him for a moment. Most people don't bother, she said quietly. They just speak louder and hope. Jake's jaw tightened. Yeah, that sounds familiar. He practiced a few more times, murmuring the words under his breath. Sorry. Thank you. Ear. Pain. Stop. The rhythm of it settled into his muscles. Later that afternoon, he found a reason to be near Sophie's study room. He told himself he was just checking outlets, testing emergency lights. But every time he walked by her doorway, he listened not for sound, but for signs of strain in her small shoulders, the way she cradled her head. Finally, he saw an opening. Sophie sat at a table tracing shapes in a work booklet. The interpreter had stepped out to speak with a staff member. Sunlight filtered through the glass, but the room itself was quiet, thick padded silence. Jake stepped inside slowly, boots making soft taps on the floor. He lifted his hands where she could see them and signed, "Hi." Her eyes widened a fraction. She put her pencil down. Jake pointed to himself. Jake, he spelled clumsily, feeling like a beginner all over again. She watched his fingers, then knotted lips curving a little. He walked to the side of the table, not too close, and tapped lightly on the wooden surface, just enough to create a subtle vibration. Her fingertips brushed the table. She felt it. Her gaze flicked to his hand. He tapped again, this time in a slow pattern. Tap. Tap. Tap, tap. Sophie's eyes narrowed with concentration. She lifted her own hand and copied the rhythm. A tiny smile, real, unguarded, glimmered at the corner of her mouth. Jake's chest warmed. Then he reached into his pocket and set a small metal washer on the table. He flicked it gently so it spun and rattled, producing a thin, metallic ring. To him, it was barely a sound. To a normal ear, it was a delicate noise. To Sophie, she flinched. Her right hand flew to her ear. Her face tightened as if the sound wasn't just a sound, it was a needle. Jake froze. Slowly, carefully, he signed pain and tapped his ear. Then he pointed left-right, inviting her to choose. She pointed firmly to her right ear. Her eyes shimmered with something close to frustration. He swallowed. How long, he thought, wishing he knew how to ask it properly. The interpreter returned then, and the moment broke. Sophie's expression smoothed over the way children learn to protect adults from their own discomfort. She picked up her pencil and bent over her worksheet. Jake backed out of the room, heart pounding. This isn't just silence, he thought. This is something else. Later that day, a work order came in over his radio. Coleman, we've got a tripped breaker in the family office wing. Some outlets are acting up near the private study. Can you check it? On my way, he replied. The family office area was quieter than the rest of the estate. Carpet softened his footsteps. A clock on the wall ticked faintly, a steady heartbeat for the space. Helena's office door stood slightly ajar. He knocked once. No answer. Ma'am, he called gently. Maintenance. I was told there was an issue with the power. No response, just the soft hum of a computer left on sleep mode. He stepped inside, staying near the wall-eyes, scanning for the outlet panel. His gaze passed over a family photo, a crystal award, a stack of perfectly aligned folders. Then it landed on the open laptop screen. Medical software glowed faintly. A patient file sat open. He didn't need to read the name to know who it was. The image on the screen showed a cross-section of an ear canal in grayscale. A curved shape sat along one side, thin, pale, slightly darker than its surroundings. Underneath, in small typed notes, one phrase repeated across multiple images. Shadow, artifact, not clinically significant. Jake stared. Once, twice, 3 times. The same curved shape appeared in image after image, angle after angle, like a stubborn symbol refusing to disappear. He didn't know medicine, but he knew patterns. He'd spent half his life staring at electrical diagrams, tracing currents, spotting repeated faults. If a glitch appeared once, you could call it noise. If it appeared in the exact same way, over and over, it wasn't noise. It was a problem. He took a slow breath. That's not a shadow, he muttered. That's something. Before fear could talk him out of it, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo of the screen. The shutter sound clicked softly in the quiet room. His pulse jumped. He backed away, found the breaker panel, and flipped open the metal door. He adjusted the switches just enough to justify having been there. Then he stepped out and pulled the office door gently closed. His phone felt heavier in his pocket than any tool he carried. That night, long after most lights in the resort dimmed, Jake sat in his tiny staff quarters back against the wall, listening to the low hum of the mini fridge and the distant crash of waves. He opened the photo on his phone, zooming in on the shape again and again. Finally, he scrolled to a number labeled Hannah, ENT nurse, and hit call. She answered on the second ring. Jake, wow, it's been a while. Yeah, he said, voice rough. Sorry to bug you. I need your brain for a second. He described the images without names, without locations. Just an 8-year-old girl, a series of scans, and the same shadow repeating in every shot. On the other end, he heard the rustle of papers, the faint beep of a distant monitor, someone calling for a chart. Hannah's voice came back thoughtful. If that shadow appears in multiple images from different angles, she said, it probably isn't just an artifact. It could be a foreign body, something stuck in the canal hugging the wall. With little kids, especially those in NICU, we used to use ear protectors. Sometimes pieces break off. Jake's throat tightened. And if no one ever... Noticed then that kid might have had pain-recurrent infections, distorted hearing, all chalked up to something else. She sighed. But I can't say more without seeing her. This is hypothetical. Okay, I'm not giving a diagnosis. I know, he said softly. You've already given me more than you think. He hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, the ocean pounded the shore in relentless cycles. Inside, a small clock ticked on his nightstand. Every sound suddenly felt personal, like a reminder of everything this child had been missing or feeling only as pain. If I'm wrong, he thought I look like an idiot and probably lose my job. If I'm right, then she's been living with something no one bothered to question for 8 years. The thought made his hands curl into fists. He stood, heart beating hard enough that he could hear it in his ears. Somewhere in the vast, quiet estate, Sophie was sleeping, or trying to, maybe with her hand pressed to that same aching ear. Jake stared at his reflection in the small window, the faint outline of a man in a blue uniform who used to be someone else. Someone who didn't walk away when a system failed. He exhaled, decision solidifying in his gut. Tomorrow, he whispered, I talked to her mother. Whether it cost him his job or not, he was done pretending this was just a shadow. Morning light drifted across the Ward estate like a soft curtain, but Helena felt none of its warmth. She sat alone at the edge of her bed, elbows on her knees, fingers tangled in her dark hair as she tried again to steady her breathing. Today was supposed to be simple. Finalize the proposal for the European cochlear trial. Confirm the travel arrangements, reassure investors, and pretend once more that she wasn't barely holding herself together. But memory had its own agenda. As she lifted her head, the faint imagined rhythm of hospital monitors pulsed through her mind, those cold, sharp beeps that had lived inside her for 8 long years. The NICU had been a world she never wanted to revisit. Bright fluorescent lights, antiseptic air, quiet chaos. Sophie had been so small, wrapped in tubes and blankets, her tiny chest rising and falling in quick, fragile breaths. A nurse, Helena could barely remember her face now, had fastened a pair of plastic infant ear protectors over Sophie's head. We use these to reduce loud noise. Chin up. Babies, adjust, the woman had said with forced cheer. Then she was gone, swallowed by the rush of medical staff moving like a storm around the incubators. Hours later, the attending physician pulled Helena aside. His tone was gentle, but the words were blades. There are indications of congenital auditory nerve issues. We'll do further testing, but you should prepare yourself. Congenital, born deaf. 2 words that rewired Helena's entire life. She'd tried asking questions, she remembered that much. But her husband had died in a plane crash just weeks before, and grief had hollowed out her voice. She was drowning in responsibility and loss, in fear, and she accepted the prognosis without the strength to push back. That weakness haunted her more than anything else. A soft knock pulled her back to the present. Ms. Ward, her assistant, called. Your morning brief is ready. Also, Dr. Sato confirmed availability for the European procedure. He says the earlier Sophie arrives, the better. Helena closed her eyes. 1% chance of success, she reminded herself. They'd said that. And she'd agreed. Because a mother with no answers clings to even the thinnest rope. Thank you, she whispered. I'll be down shortly. She dressed quickly, smoothing the crisp blazer over her shoulders, crafting the image that kept her empire running elegant, composed, invulnerable. But today, beneath the armor, fear trembled. Jake waited outside her office with a knot in his stomach, palms sweating against his tools. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He'd faced men twice his size, flames licking at his heels, broken systems ready to explode. But facing a billionaire mother about her daughter's medical condition. That was different. That somehow felt scarier. When Helena entered, her gaze flicked to him. Mr. Coleman, she said, voice even. Is there a problem? He cleared his throat. Ma'am, I know I'm overstepping, and I know this could get me fired, but I need to ask you something. It's about Sophie. Just the mention of her daughter's name made Helena's jaw tighten. What about her? Jake chose his words carefully. Has she been touching her right ear a lot, or reacting to certain noises, even faint ones? Her expression shifted, but not in the way he hoped. It hardened. Why are you asking me this? Because I've seen her in pain, he said, hands moving instinctively as if they wanted to sign the words. Not confused, not startled. Pain. And I've seen medical images. Her eyes flashed. You went through my daughter's medical files? No, Jake said quickly. I didn't go looking for anything. The screen was open, and I recognized something. I think something might be wrong that hasn't been checked. Helena's voice lowered into a dangerous calm. And you believe you, a janitor, have discovered what a team of specialists missed? Jake swallowed. I believe kids don't draw pain unless they feel it. And she drew an ear that's enough. Helena stepped toward him, heels clicking like punctuation marks. You think because you've been here a week you understand my daughter. You think you're the first person who tried to save us with wild theories. It's not wild, Jake said softly. Just maybe worth checking. Helena shook her head. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for her, what I've spent, what I've endured. Don't you dare come into my home suggesting I've failed her. Jake's heart clenched. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what I heard, she snapped. From now on, your responsibility is to maintain this property. Nothing more. Stay away from Sophie unless absolutely necessary. The words landed like cold steel. Jake stepped back. He wasn't angry, just hurting in a way he didn't expect. He nodded once. Understood, ma'am. But as he left the office, something on the wall caught his eye. Sophie's latest drawing pinned onto a corkboard. The same right ear, the same spirals of black pain. And now, tiny red dots radiating outward like sparks. A silent cry drawn in pencil. Jake stared at it for a long moment, fists clenching at his sides. Someone has to listen, he thought. Even if her mother won't. Helena stayed in the office long after Jake left, breath trembling. She hated him for what he'd said, but she hated herself more for how quickly her defensiveness rose. Was it because she feared he might be right? She pushed the thought down the way she'd pushed down 1,000 doubts over the years. She grabbed her keys and the folder for the European trial. There was no time for emotional spirals. She had a flight to catch, a deal to secure a future to fight for. Later that afternoon, as she stood by the car, Sophie appeared behind the window of the front foyer, small hand pressed to the glass lips, forming words Helena couldn't hear. The caretaker signed it for her. Sophie says, Mom, be careful. I'll wait for your sound. Helena froze. Your sound. She hadn't heard that phrase in years, back when Sophie was a toddler trying to feel Helena's voice through her chest when hugs were the closest thing to communication. Her throat tightened. She almost turned back. Almost. But fear, old familiar fear, won. She stepped into the car and shut the door, sealing herself away from the guilt. As the engine started, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The wind picked up. Glass shuddered softly in its frame behind her. Inside the estate, Sophie watched the car drive away, one hand still on the glass. And deep inside the hallway, Jake stood alone, staring at the storm clouds gathering over the shoreline. He whispered into the coming wind, I'm not letting this go. The sound of thunder grew louder. A storm was forming inside the Ward family and outside on the darkening sea. By early afternoon, the wind along the coastline had changed its voice. It no longer brushed softly against the windows, it pressed. Heavy, restless, carrying the promise of something stronger. The resort staff kept checking the weather alerts on their phones, the digital warnings flashing shades of orange and red. A storm was forming offshore, large enough that even the wealthy guests began to shift uneasily. Jake felt it before he saw it. Years of electrical work had tuned his body to changes, and air pressure storms were unpredictable, unforgiving. They shook the bones of buildings and exposed every overlooked flaw. And now they were coming for the Ward estate. He moved through the corridors checking window seals, emergency lights, backup generators. His hands worked automatically, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Stay away from my daughter. Helena's words still echoed in his head. He understood her fear, even if she didn't. A parent drowning will sometimes push away the one person trying to keep them afloat. But that didn't make it easier to swallow. He paused outside Sophie's study room and peeked in. She sat alone at her table sketchbook, open, her tutor having stepped out for a moment. Through the thick windows behind her, the sky darkened, clouds curling like a giant fist drawing closer. Sophie wasn't looking outside. Her right hand was pressed against her ear again, fingers splayed like a small shield. That tiny gesture punched something deep inside Jake. He stepped into the room with deliberate calm, tapping lightly on the doorframe so she could see the movement. Her head lifted immediately. Recognition dawned in her eyes, not fear, just quiet expectation. Jake smiled gently and raised his hands to sign, "May I come in?" She nodded. He walked to the nearest window and ran his fingers along the frame, pretending to check for drafts. But he kept glancing at her reflection in the glass. Sophie watched him with quiet interest. Jake tapped the table, once a soft vibration. She touched her fingertips to the wood. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm matched his. Jake felt something in his chest loosen. "Good," he whispered without thinking, though he knew she couldn't hear. "You're paying attention. That's good." He turned and signed slowly, "Storm coming." Loud outside, safe in here. She looked toward the storm clouds as if reading the sky. Her small shoulders tensed, not from sound she heard none, but from pressure. Air shifted before storms, pushing against skin and sinuses, creating discomfort she couldn't name. Her fingers drifted back toward her right ear. Jake crouched beside her. He signed carefully, "Dean Turdine." She nodded. More gently this time he asked, "Here." He pointed to the right. Her nod was immediate. He inhaled slow and deep. "Okay," he murmured, though the word was mostly for himself. "Hang in there, kiddo. I'm working on it." Just then, the caretaker returned, smiling politely, and Jake stepped back. He gave Sophie a small wave before slipping out of the room, pretending to adjust a thermostat on the wall. But inside, the pressure building in the air felt personal. Meanwhile, Helena Ward stood in her private garage clutching her documents as her driver checked the road conditions. "Ma'am," he said gently, "they're advising travel delays. The storm may hit faster than expected." Helena glanced at her phone. Investors overseas were waiting. The European medical team had agreed to see Sophie sooner than expected. Turning back now would mean rescheduling a meeting she'd fought months to secure. "Let's go," she said, opening the car door. But before sliding inside, something tugged at her attention. She looked back toward the mansion's glass foyer. There, behind the window, was Sophie. The little girl's hand was pressed against the glass, her forehead resting beside it. She watched her mother with wide, steady eyes. Her lips moved in small shapes, forming words she couldn't hear. Helena swallowed hard. "What is she saying?" The caretaker interpreted softly. She said, "Mom, be careful. I'll wait for your sound." Helena's breath hitched. Something inside her nearly cracked open. "Your sound. Not your voice. Your sound." The memory slammed into her, the years when Sophie, barely a toddler, would press her cheek to Helena's chest just to feel her hum lullabies she couldn't hear. For a heartbeat, Helena considered running back. But fear, old familiar fear, wrapped around her like cold rope. She whispered to herself, "She'll be okay. It's only a few hours." And with that, she stepped into the car, shutting the door on the image of her daughter waiting with an empty kind of hope. The engine started. The garage door lifted. The car rolled into the growing wind. The moment Helena left the estate shifted. The classic calm of a billionaire's home fell away, replaced by quiet chaos, people checking generators, securing outdoor furniture, closing heavy storm shutters. Jake moved from room to room, tightening bolts, testing circuits, ensuring the old wiring wouldn't give out under pressure. But every time lightning flickered across the sky, his thoughts returned to Sophie. He needed to stay close without breaking Helena's order. Fortunately, storms gave him reasons to be everywhere. He found himself back near Sophie's hallway as the first real gust slammed against the glass. The pressure drop reverberated through the building, air, hushed, then groaned. Inside the study room, Sophie stood up abruptly, clutching her ear harder. Her sketchbook slid off the table papers, scattering. Her caretaker rushed in to help, but Sophie shook her head and stepped back, overwhelmed by a sensation she couldn't name. Jake felt the shift even from outside. He knew that feeling, the eerie stillness that always came seconds before a storm, unleashed its full strength. He began checking the large windows lining the hallway, pressing against them to ensure their seals held. He could feel the vibration deep in the frame. Without realizing it, he positioned himself closer to Sophie's door, letting instinct guide him. If anything happened, if the storm shook the structure or the lights flickered or the pressure spiked, he wanted to be within reach. Outside, thunder rumbled, rolling long and low across the sea. Inside, Sophie flinched not from sound, but from the pressure, the way the air itself seemed to throb against the sensitive spot in her ear. Jake breathed out slowly. "You're not alone, kid," he whispered under his breath. "I'm right here." The lights above them flickered once, twice. The storm was arriving, and with it, the moment everything would change. A flash lit the sky white. The lights trembled overhead. Sophie stumbled, holding her ear. The storm was no longer approaching, it had arrived, and Jake, heart-pounding, took one step toward the hallway, ready for whatever came next. The storm didn't announce itself with a single roar. It crept in slowly, first as a low groan pressing against the mansion's thick windows, then as a tremble in the wooden frames, and finally as a sudden crack of thunder that seemed to rattle the very bones of the house. Outside, the sky had swallowed every trace of blue. Inside, the lights began their restless dance. Flicker, hum, fade, return. Sophie moved through the upstairs hallway, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. The shifting air pressure made her right ear throb, a dizzying ache that pulsed behind her eyes. She didn't hear the thunder, but she felt it. It moved through the floorboards, through her ribs, through the fragile place in her skull that had hurt for as long as she could remember. She winced as another vibration rolled through the mansion. The lights above her flickered again. She pressed her palm harder against her ear, breathing through the pain. At the far end of the hall, hidden by shadows, Jake was kneeling in front of an electrical panel, tightening the screws on a breaker cover while the storm outside tried its hardest to pry the world apart. He could feel the house shaking beneath him, subtle but unmistakable. The generator's going to kick in soon, he thought, and when it does, the old wiring might not take it. He'd already been working double time since the storm began, darting between wings of the mansion, checking every critical system. But now, a soft thud echoed down the hallway, sharp, heavy wrong. Jake's head snapped up. Another sound followed, a small gasp. Not a true sound, more like the ghost of one, but enough to send him sprinting toward it. He turned the corner just in time to see Sophie stumbling, her sketchbook slipping from her fingers as she crashed gently against the wall and slid to the floor. Lightning flashed outside. The lights died completely. Jake rushed toward her, the beam of his small work flashlight slicing through the sudden darkness. She was curled into herself, hands clamped around her right ear, her small shoulders trembling. Her face twisted in a kind of silent agony that made Jake's heart squeeze painfully tight. He dropped to his knees and raised his free hand where she could see it. "Are you hurt?" he signed, fingers trembling. Her eyes squeezed shut. She tapped her right ear frantically. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Jake swallowed hard and pressed his flashlight against his chest so she could see both of his hands again. "Pain." She nodded quickly. "Here." He pointed at the right ear. She nodded again, harder this time, shoulders shaking. Jake inhaled, slowly steadying himself. "Okay," he whispered aloud even though she couldn't hear. "I've got you. You're okay, I promise." He signed again. "May I look?" He pointed to her ear and then to himself. She hesitated. She had every reason not to trust adults, not when so many had dismissed her pain as something else. But finally her fingers released their grip on her ear. She nodded once. It was enough. Jake gently angled her head toward his flashlight beam. He lowered his voice instinctively as if quiet could soothe her even if she couldn't hear. "This might tickle a little," he murmured. He shone the light into her right ear. What he saw made his breath catch. There, deep inside, hugging the inner canal, was the same curved blackish shape he'd seen in the medical scans. Except now up close it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a foreign object, a piece of something synthetic, a curved shard of plastic. Likely the same protector piece they'd used on her in the NICU 8 years ago. He stared at it for a full second that felt like an eternity. Dear God, it's really there. Another rumble shook the house from foundation to rafters. Sophie flinched violently, hands flying back to her ear. Jake reacted on instinct. He placed one hand gently over hers and signed with the other, "I can help. But only if you want me to." Her breathing hitched. She studied him with tear-filled eyes, searching his face, his posture, the steadiness in his hands. And then she reached out and gripped the sleeve of his janitor's uniform. Permission. Jake nodded once, fiercely protective. "All right," he whispered. "Just stay with me. You're doing great." He reached into his tool belt, not for anything painful or sharp, but for a tiny sterile plastic hook he used for cleaning delicate electrical sensors. He wiped it with an alcohol pad until his fingers shook from precision. He signed again. "If it hurts, tap my arm." She nodded. Then he angled the flashlight and slowly brought the tool toward her ear. Lightning cracked outside. The generator hummed to life. The lights quivered. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, gripping Jake's arm with her free hand. He worked with painstaking care, guiding the hook to the edge of the foreign object, trying not to scrape the sensitive skin. He felt resistance at first. The plastic shard wouldn't budge. Jake's breath stuttered. "Come on." "Just a little," he murmured. He adjusted his angle. His pulse pounded in his ears. Water drummed against the windows outside. The storm seemed to hold its breath with him. He tried again. This time something shifted. The shard loosened just a millimeter. Jake froze, steadying his hand. "You're okay," he whispered, even though she could only feel the calm in his touch. "Almost there." He signed with his free hand, "Brave." Her lips trembled, but she didn't pull away. Jake drew one last breath, then pulled slowly, carefully, and the object began to slide outward. Just then, another bolt of lightning hit the shoreline, causing the entire mansion to shudder violently. The lights flickered so hard that for a moment everything plunged into pitch black. In the darkness, Sophie's fingers clawed at Jake's sleeve. His heartbeat thundered against his ribs. He tightened his grip. "Hang on, kid," he whispered, voice trembling with urgency. "Don't move." When the lights flickered weakly back on, the shard was halfway out, and with one final careful pull it slipped free. A piece of dark, curved plastic, wet, worn, jagged around the edges, fell into Jake's trembling hand. He stared at it, horrified and breathless. "It's been here. All this time." Sophie opened her eyes slowly, breathing fast, her hand still gripping Jake's arm as though he were the only stable thing in a shaking world. The storm raged on, but inside, everything had changed. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows like an angry demand for entry. The emergency lights flickered again before settling into a weak but steady glow, just enough to illuminate the tiny, dark piece of plastic trembling in Jake's hand. Sophie stared at the object with wide, tear-glossed eyes. She didn't know what it was, not really. But she knew what it felt like to have it lodged in her ear, 8 years of pressure pain and silence she could never explain. Jake swallowed hard. His throat felt tight as if his own breath had been stolen. The shard lay in his palm like proof of something unthinkable, an answer buried for almost a decade. He forced himself to steady to breathe. This wasn't the time for panic. The girl in front of him needed calm, not fear. He signed gently. "You're okay." Sophie's small hand lifted uncertainly. She touched her right ear, then her fingertips trembled as she lowered them. Jake saw the question in her eyes. "What now?" He lifted his flashlight again. "I need to check, sweetheart," he whispered, "just to make sure nothing else is in there." He signed the same message for her, his movements slow and soft. She nodded, trusting him more than she trusted the storm, the walls, the world. Jake angled the beam and examined the canal again. Redness, irritation, but no more foreign objects. Relief poured through him, warm and heavy. He put the tool away and exhaled. All done. Then something happened. Something so small, so fragile that it took a full second for Jake to understand what he was hearing. A sound barely there escaped Sophie's lips. A soft, shaky whisper of air brushing vocal cords that had never learned how to form words. She blinked. The sound startled her as much as it startled him. Jake froze. "Sophie," he whispered. She pressed her fingers to her ear. Her breath hitched, drawing in gently as if the air around her suddenly felt different. Then, slowly, she turned toward the wall clock mounted above the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand moved in tiny, rhythmic steps. Sophie's lips parted. "Ty." Jake's heart cracked open. Not perfectly pronounced. Not smooth, but real. A sound. A word. Her first. Sophie's eyes widened as if she'd heard something impossible. And she had. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just feeling the world, she was hearing it. Tears pooled instantly. Her fingers pointed to the clock, trembling. "Ty." Jake's vision blurred. He swallowed a sob he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's right," he whispered. "That's the clock. You're hearing it." She breathed fast, almost panicked, not from fear, but from shock, from the sudden awakening of a sense she thought she'd never know. She reached out blindly, gripping Jake's sleeve. He covered her small hand with his own, grounding her. "You're okay," he murmured. "I promise. You're okay." Sophie pressed her ear again, this time gently, cautiously. She looked around as if testing her new reality. Then footsteps. Fast. Frantic. Water dripped from the hall runner. Cold wind chased in from downstairs. Jake turned just as Helena Ward burst into the hallway soaked from the storm, her hair clinging to her face, her breath ragged. Her flight had been grounded at the last second, forcing her to return home through wind and rain. She hadn't expected chaos. She hadn't expected darkness. She certainly hadn't expected this. Her gaze locked onto the scene. Her daughter sitting on the floor. A janitor kneeling beside her. A strange, dark object in his hand. A tool near her ear. Her child crying. Helena's heart seized. "What are you doing to my daughter?" Her voice ripped through the hallway like a raw blade. Sophie jolted, startled by the vibrations of her mother's shout, even if she couldn't fully hear the sound itself. Before Jake could speak, 2 security guards rushed in behind Helena, grabbing him by the arms and yanking him away from Sophie. "Wait, stop." Jake tried to get the words out, but adrenaline and panic strangled them. Helena stepped forward, fury and terror blurring together. Get him away from her. Sophie watched her breaths sharp, her hands shaking. She reached forward instinctively, but Jake was pulled back too fast. His flashlight clattered to the floor. One of the guards barked, "We found the emergency breaker open downstairs. He's been messing with the wiring." "That's not. I was fixing it." She was in pain. Jake choked out. But Helena wasn't listening. Her gaze had zeroed in on the plastic shard lying on the floor. Her face drained of color. "What? What is that?" she whispered. Sophie opened her mouth, and for the first time in her life she pushed sound through her trembling vocal cords to reach her mother. "Mom." The word cracked through the corridor, thin, shaky, imperfect, but unmistakably real. Helena froze. Her eyes widened. Her breath vanished. Time itself seemed to stop. Sophie stared at her mother with desperate, pleading eyes. Jake, held tightly by the guards, couldn't move. He could only watch as the impossible unfolded. Sophie whispered again, weaker this time, the word dissolving into a sob. Helena stumbled backward, hand flying to her mouth. Tears sprang instantly. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her. "Oh my God," she whispered, choking on her own breath. "Sophie, you spoke." The guards loosened their grip on Jake, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. But before he could say anything, before Helena could gather herself, a medical staff member rushed in. "Miss Ward, we need to get her to the hospital immediately. She's in visible distress." Helena nodded dazedly, wiping her cheeks with trembling hands. She scooped Sophie into her arms, holding her daughter as though afraid she might slip away. The little girl's hands curled against her mother's collar, her face buried in her shoulder, tiny sobs shaking through her. Jake stood helplessly, chest tight, throat burning. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to reassure, but security pushed him back as they rushed mother and child toward the front entrance. "Ms. Ward will handle him," one guard said. "Focus on your daughter." Helena looked back only once, her face torn between gratitude, horror, and confusion. But the fear won. She turned away before Jake could meet her eyes. The last sound Jake heard was the heavy slam of the emergency room doors as they closed between him and the little girl whose life had just changed. Jake pressed his palms to the cold wall, breath shaking. The storm outside roared its approval. The secret in Sophie's ear was out, but the consequences had only begun. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, rain-soaked clothing and fear. Not the loud, frantic kind, no one shouting, no alarms blaring, but the quiet, suffocating fear that presses into the walls and lingers in every breath. Helena paced the hallway outside the evaluation room, arms wrapped tightly around herself, hair still damp from the storm. Her heels clicked in short, frantic bursts. She tried to stay composed. She was Helena Ward, after all, a woman who negotiated 9-figure deals before breakfast. But right now, she was just a mother, watching years of certainty crumble under her feet. Inside the room, a specialist team worked around Sophie with practiced gentleness. A pediatric ENT, 2 nurses, and a technician all moving quietly as they prepared the tiny fiber-optic scope. Sophie sat hunched on the exam bed, wrapped in a warm blanket. Her breathing was shallow, quick, but her eyes were open, alert, trying to understand a world that suddenly had sound leaking into its edges. She kept touching her right ear, not in fear this time, but in wonder. "Ms. Ward," a nurse called softly. Helena nearly jumped. "Yes, you can come in." Her heart hammered as she stepped through the door. Sophie immediately reached out, small fingers curling around her mother's wrist. Helena kissed the top of her daughter's hair and whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here." Even though Sophie couldn't understand the words fully, she leaned into the comfort of them. The ENT cleared his throat gently. "Ms. Ward, we're going to show you something." He turned the monitor toward her. The camera inside Sophie's ear displayed a magnified world-tender skin, faint veins, the delicate canal. And then, right beside the scope's light, the ENT pointed to an area raw and irritated. "That," he said, "is the contact pattern from prolonged pressure. This is consistent with a foreign object having been lodged here for quite some time." Helena stared. She had no words, no breath, nothing. The ENT continued, quietly careful with every syllable. "We compared it with the piece the staff retrieved from your home. It is almost certainly from an infant ear protector used in NICUs 8 years ago. This is very rare, but not impossible." Helena's knees weakened. She gripped the bed rail to steady herself. For years, the doctor said gently her pain, her reactions, her partial responses to vibrations, it was not neurological. At least, not entirely. It came from irritation and obstruction caused by that object. Helena's voice finally broke free. How could so many specialists miss this? The ENT sighed a weary, honest sound. Bias. Expectations. When a child is labeled as born deaf, every symptom tends to be filtered through that lens. Scans interpret shadows as artifacts. Teams assume the hearing pathway is non-functional and stop looking deeper. It is not malicious, but it is a limitation of human judgment. Helena felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. She blinked hard, refusing to cry again, but tears still came. It wasn't just the missed diagnosis. It was 8 years of assumptions, 8 years of specialists reassuring her that born deaf meant unchangeable. 8 years of believing her daughter lived in silence, because Helena hadn't asked the right questions when she had the chance. Now, Sophie tugged her sleeve. She pointed to the heart monitor beeping beside her soft, steady tones. And then, carefully, she mouthed a word. A tiny, shaky whisper escaped her, B. Helena broke. "Sweetheart," she choked, pulling Sophie into her arms, you can hear something. Her hands trembled as she held her daughter's face between them. "You can hear." More tears spilled Sophie's and hers, but the miracle was tangled with another emotion, guilt so heavy it threatened to crush Helena's ribs. She almost didn't notice the hospital security guard approaching until he cleared his throat. "Ms. Ward, the man who was with your daughter, the janitor, we have him in the security room for questioning." He hesitated. "He's not resisting. Says he'll stay as long as needed." Helena stiffened. She didn't know what she felt toward him anymore. Confusion, gratitude, anger, shame. All she knew was this: he had touched her daughter. He had removed something from her ear, and he had seen a truth she hadn't. I'll speak with him," she said. Jake sat in the hospital security room on a hard chair under cold fluorescent light. His uniform was damp. His knuckles were scraped from earlier work. He looked tired, bone-deep, tired but calm. He had told the guards everything. Not about Helena's medical files, not about the scan photos. Just the facts. Sophie had been in pain, something didn't look right, and he acted to help her. Whatever happened next, he'd accept it. He didn't care about his job, not compared to the look on Sophie's face when she heard that first ticking sound. The door opened. Helena stepped in. The guards stood straighter. Jake rose instinctively. Her eyes were red, but her posture remained tall years of training, keeping her spine straight even as her voice trembled. "Mr. Coleman." She began, then stopped swallowing. It took a long moment before she found her next breath. They explained everything. Jake nodded once. "How is she?" Helena blinked, not what she expected him to ask. "She's hearing some things. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but she's hearing." Jake exhaled relief, striking him like a physical force. "Good. That's good." Silence stretched thick-weighted with the echoes of misunderstandings and fear. Finally, Helena whispered, "You saved my daughter." Jake shook his head. "No, I just didn't look away." Her chin trembled. "I owe you an apology." He hesitated. "Ma'am, you were scared. Anyone would be." "But I was wrong," she said fiercely, tears rising again. "I was so afraid of the world hurting her I didn't realize I'd stopped listening to her myself." Jake didn't speak. He understood fear better than most. Her voice softened. "I don't know what happens next, legally, medically, but I know this. I don't want you punished for helping her." Jake closed his eyes briefly. Relief flickered through him. "Thank you," he murmured. Helena stepped back and opened the door. "Come with me. Sophie asked for you." Jake's breath caught. She asked for me. He followed Helena down the hallway, his boots echoing softly. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a new world, one filled with uncertainty. Yes, but also something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Jake paused outside Sophie's room, hearing the faint rhythm of a heart monitor ticking steadily. For the first time, he wondered if this moment, This fragile bridge between silence and sound would change all of their lives forever. The hallway outside Sophie's room felt strangely quiet, not the sterile, oppressive quiet that had defined her life for 8 years, but the gentle kind that sits just before something important happens. Jake stood there feeling the rhythm of his own heartbeat in his palms. He wiped his hands against his uniform, suddenly aware of every stain, every crease. He had never been self-conscious a day in his life, not even when covered in soot and sweat from industrial work. But right now, he felt unworthy of entering the room of a little girl whose world had just opened for the first time. Helena Ward stood beside him. She wasn't the iron-willed CEO anymore. Her posture remained poised, but her eyes, soft worn, were the eyes of a mother stripped bare. "You can go in," she murmured. "She keeps signing your name, or something close to it." A faint smile touched her lips. "She taps her sleeve like she did with yours." Jake's throat tightened. Okay. Yeah." Helena stepped aside and Jake walked into the room. Sophie sat on the bed knees, pulled to her chest, a small set of cushioned headphones resting around her neck. Electrodes monitored her vitals. The heart monitor gave steady beeps, soft, rhythmic, alive. Her head snapped up the second he entered. Her eyes, bright brimming, seemed to lift the entire room. She reached out. Not hesitantly, not cautiously, but as if she'd been waiting for him. Jake moved slowly to her bedside. "Hey," he whispered. "You doing okay?" Sophie placed a trembling hand on his wrist, then pointed to the heart monitor. "B, P," she said softly, the sound rolling unevenly from her tongue. Jake bit down hard on the emotion rising in him. "That's right," he managed. "That's the beeping. You're hearing it." She looked around, wide-eyed, then pointed at the door where a nurse had just walked by. Her shoes squeaked faintly on the polished floor. Sophie startled at the noise, then whispered again. "Hey." "That's footsteps," Jake said, voice cracking with awe. "A sound people make when they walk." Sophie repeated the word in her own way, more breath than voice, but still real. Jake couldn't help it. He laughed softly, tears slipping down before he could stop them. "You're incredible, kid." Helena stepped inside, then quiet as a breath. She watched the two of them, the janitor and her daughter, connected by something she had never been able to reach through money power or medical expertise. Jake turned suddenly self-conscious again. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for everything earlier. I didn't mean to scare her." Or Helena raised a hand gently. "Please, don't apologize." Her voice trembled soft but resolute. "You saw what no one else saw. You listened when professionals didn't. You acted when I froze." Jake shook his head. "You weren't frozen. You were fighting for her. You've been fighting for her every day." At that, Helena looked down, guilt and gratitude warring inside her. The doctor soon entered with the test results. He explained the long-term inflammation, the likely impact on Sophie's partial hearing, the next steps. Through it all, Sophie clung to Jake's sleeve with one hand and Helena's with the other, her eyes darting between the two people who had just become the axis of her little world. When the doctor finished and stepped out, Helena took a slow, shaky breath. "Mr. Coleman." "Jake," he said softly. She nodded. "Jake. I don't know how to say this properly. I've been angry, afraid unfair, and blind. But you—" Her voice caught. "You saved my daughter from 8 more years of pain." Jake looked down at the calloused hands that had done it, the same hands that had failed to save Emily, the same hands that had spent years fixing things no one cared about. "I just didn't want her hurting anymore." That, Helena whispered, is exactly why I owe you more than an apology. She turned to the guards lingering outside the door. "He is no longer under any investigation. Release any reports you filed." The guards nodded. Then she faced Jake again. "I want you to stay, not as janitor on the night shift, as head of maintenance and safety across the entire ward resort system. It's a substantial pay increase." And Jake blinked, stunned. Ms. Ward, Thank you, but I don't know if—" And she continued softly, "I want to help you with your custody case. Your son deserves to be with you." Her voice steadied. "You fought for my child. Let me help you fight for yours." Jake's breath left him. For a second he felt weightless, as if he were hearing something impossible. "You'd do that?" Helena nodded. "I intend to." The room fell quiet except for the faint heart monitor and the storm retreating outside. Sophie squeezed both their hands and whispered a shaky, "Fa." "There." Jake froze, his eyes widening. Helena's breath caught. "Sophie? Did you mean father?" Sophie looked at Jake, then touched his sleeve, the place she always grabbed when she needed help, comfort, or courage. She nodded. The word had been unsteady, imperfect, but full of recognition. Jake sank to his knees beside her bed, overwhelmed. "Sweetheart," he said hoarsely, "I'm not your father, but I'm here. I promise you that." Sophie smiled a real smile. Small, soft, hopeful. Helena pressed a hand to her heart, emotion flooding her chest. This man had walked into her life wearing a blue janitor's uniform, but right now he was the only person who truly understood her daughter. Moments later, a nurse stepped in. "She's ready to be discharged soon, but we need to show her how to manage sensory input. She may be overwhelmed." Helena nodded, but her gaze lingered on Sophie's face, lit with new awareness. Jake helped adjust the headphones gently over her ears. "These will help calm the world down a bit," he murmured. "Lots of new sounds. It's okay if it's too much." "You're not alone," Sophie whispered. "Oh, Kay," her voice trembling with effort. Then Helena stepped closer. "Jake, would you come with us? Back to the resort?" He hesitated, remembering her earlier command, "Stay away from my daughter." But that woman, the fearful, rigid version of her, was gone. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'll come." As they stepped out of the room together, Helena, Sophie, and Jake, the storm clouds outside finally broke open, revealing a strip of soft, golden sky. Sophie looked toward the window, hearing the muffled roar of waves for the very first time. She turned to Jake. "What is that?" The answer, and everything it would change, waited in the next chapter. The next few weeks unfolded like a series of small miracles, quiet ones, gentle ones, the kind that bloom slowly and change everything without fanfare. For the first time in her life, Sophie Ward woke each morning into a world that didn't simply move, it spoke. The ocean still looked the same from her bedroom window, but now she could sense a faint rumble beneath its waves like a distant drum. She didn't always like sound. It was confusing, overwhelming, sometimes painful, but there was wonder in the discovery. And wonder, when given to a child who has lived in silence, becomes something holy. Helena watched all of it with a tenderness she hadn't let herself feel in years. She found herself waking early just to listen to Sophie practice new sounds with her speech therapist. Sometimes Sophie would get frustrated, scrunching her face and pressing her palms to her headphones. Other times, she'd laugh a soft, breathy giggle that melted Helena's heart every single time. Jake came by most afternoons at first because Helena asked him to help with safety upgrades, and then because Sophie asked for him. Her signs were still imperfect, her speech even more so, but she had a way of pointing to the door at the expected hour, then looking at her mother with hopeful eyes. "Jake," she'd whisper, her voice barely a thread, and Helena would smile. "Yes, sweetheart." Jake. One afternoon, they sat in Sophie's therapy room as the specialist placed a set of headphones over her ears. "Okay, Sophie," the therapist said, speaking slowly so Sophie could watch her mouth. "We're going to listen to different sounds today. You tell me what you hear. Ready?" Sophie nodded, gripping Jake's hand on her left and Helena's on her right. Her anchor points to two worlds merging. First came the rain sound, gentle taps against a tin roof. Sophie blinked rapidly, tilting her head. "Ta." "That's rain," Jake whispered, "the soft kind." She smiled, amazed. Next came birdsong-light musical chirps. Sophie squinted, trying to find the shape in the air. She whispered, "Ch, ch, eep." Exactly, Helena said, voice trembling with pride. Birds. That's their song. Sound by sound, Sophie built a vocabulary of feeling. Her senses were still raw, unsure sometimes, overstimulated. But with every new tone she'd look between Helena and Jake, like she wanted to ask, "Is this real? Is this what you've heard all your life?" And every time they nodded back, reassuring her, "Yes, this is the world's sweetheart. And it's yours now, too." A few days later, Max arrived at the estate for his first visit. Jake had told him everything. The boy had listened with wide eyes, equal parts awe and protective fury that someone his age had lived with that kind of pain. Now he stood in the foyer holding his guitar like a shield. "Are you sure she wants to hear me play?" he asked nervously. Jake smiled. "Buddy, she's been talking about you all week." When they entered the living room, Sophie sat cross-legged on the rug. The moment she saw Max, her face lit up. She pointed at his guitar curiously. Max knelt in front of her. "You want to hear something?" He strummed a gentle chord, soft warm. Sophie's startled eyes widening. She placed both palms flat on the floor, feeling the vibration travel through the wood. Then she leaned toward the guitar, watching the strings tremble. Max lowered his voice. "It's music. My dad says it's like feelings with sound." Sophie whispered the new word softly. "Ma-zik." Jake swallowed hard. Music. A word she had never spoken before. A world she'd never entered. Max played a slow melody, one he'd written for his mom years ago. Sophie's breathing steadied. She leaned closer, both hands pressed to her heart as if she could trap the sound inside her chest. When Max finished, Sophie whispered, "Bo, fo." Helena's hand flew to her mouth. Jake wiped his eyes before his son noticed. Healing didn't just belong to Sophie. It reached the adults, too. Helena found herself drifting toward Jake for reasons she didn't dare name. Maybe it was the quiet steadiness he carried, the way he knelt to Sophie's level, the way he listened, truly listened to things she had long dismissed. One evening after Sophie's therapy session, they stood on the back patio overlooking the sea. The sunset bled gold across the water. "She understands so much more now," Helena whispered. "I used to think the silence protected her, but it only protected me from asking harder questions." Jake nodded. "Silence can feel safe when the truth is scary." She looked at him, eyes soft with something she'd kept locked for years. "You taught me that listening is more than hearing." Jake looked out at the horizon, avoiding the warmth rising in his chest. "We all just want someone to listen when it matters." Their silence wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken gratitude, shared battles, and something tender, growing like a fragile seed between storm-worn hearts. But healing has enemies. News outlets began catching whispers of the story little deaf girl hears for the first time. Foreign object discovered after years of misdiagnosis. Janitor involved. Cameras appeared at the edge of the property. Reporters hounded hospital staff. Old medical records were requested. Some specialists defended their original diagnoses. Others feared legal repercussions. And then the call came. Helena's legal team informed her that the original NICU hospital wanted to settle quietly. Mutual non-disclosure. Substantial compensation. No public statements. Helena stared at the documents they sent, pages dense with legal language. Money, silence, reputation, control. Everything she used to value. She placed the papers aside. She looked toward the living room where Sophie sat between Jake and Max, tapping on a small drum, laughing when the vibrations tickled her hands. For once, she heard her daughter's laughter faintly echo. Not through walls, not through memory, through sound. Helena's eyes softened. Her decision was already made. The night of the resort's grand reopening arrived. Lights glowed across the property. Guests filled the seats. The press waited to hear the CEO's speech. Backstage, Helena held the speech. Her PR team prepared a perfectly crafted piece with no mention of medical errors, no mention of Sophie's ordeal, no mention of Jake. Sophie stood near the curtain, her anticipation vibrating like the drum in her lap. Jake and Max sat in the front row, watching her with pride. The announcer called Helena's name. She walked toward the podium, heels clicking lightly. Then she paused. She looked at her daughter, at Jake, at the truth sitting in her chest like something finally ready to be spoken. Helena took the speech in her hand and tore it in half. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her fingers trembled as the shredded pages fluttered to the floor. She looked out at the audience, and for the first time in years, she spoke not with power, but with truth. The next words she would say would change everything. For the first time in the long, glittering history of Ward oceanfront resorts, the ballroom was absolutely silent. Not because the microphones failed, not because the sound system glitched, but because every soul in the room felt something shift the moment Helena Ward tore her scripted speech in half. The shredded pages drifted to the stage floor like pale feathers catching the light as they fell. Gasps fluttered through the audience. The photographers froze fingers hovering above their shutters. Even the ocean outside seemed to hush as if leaning closer. Helena lifted her eyes and met the crowd with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. She didn't need notes. She didn't need polish. She needed truth. "Good evening," she began. Voice warm, quiet, human. "You came here expecting a speech about business luxury and expansion, but tonight, we're not talking about any of that." A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. Helena inhaled. Her hands trembled just enough for those in the front row to notice, but her voice carried with surprising strength. "I want to tell you a story I've been too afraid to say out loud for 8 years." From the first row, Jake felt his breath pause. Beside him, Max squeezed Sophie's hand gently, something she felt more than heard. Sophie leaned forward, eyes fixed on her mother. "When my daughter Sophie was born," Helena continued, "the doctors told me she might never hear the world. They said she was born deaf. I accepted that. I accepted it because I was grieving my husband, overwhelmed and scared. I accepted it because it was easier than asking harder questions." Her voice cracked and she pressed a hand to her heart. "For 8 years, I lived believing silence was her destiny. I threw money, resources, and every ounce of my energy into trying to change that. But for all my efforts, I missed the most important thing." The room remained still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I stopped listening to her. A few guests lowered their eyes as if the confession struck something inside them too. "Sophie was in pain," Helena said, voice soft, but every professional saw her through the label she'd been given. They missed what was right in front of them, and so did I. She steadied herself, eyes shining. Then one night during a storm, one man refused to look away. Jake's chest tightened. He wasn't a specialist. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a person of influence or authority. He was a maintenance worker, someone most of us overlook without meaning to. But he saw my daughter's pain. He questioned what the rest of us ignored. And because of him, Helena searched the crowd until her eyes found Jake. My little girl heard her first sound. Gasps erupted. The media nearly dropped their cameras. Helena stepped aside from the microphone and extended her hand. "Please welcome my daughter, Sophie Ward." Sophie hesitated for only a second before stepping onto the stage, Max helping her up the stairs while Jake followed protectively behind. The lights brightened. A technician lowered the microphone to her height. The ballroom was so still that the faint hum of the speakers became a heartbeat. Sophie clutched the mic stand with tiny, brave fingers. Helena knelt beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just speak from here." She tapped gently over Sophie's heart. Jake stayed a few steps behind, hands folded, hardly breathing. Sophie swallowed. Her voice was thin, shaky new like a bird testing its wings. "Hello." The room erupted into soft gasps again, but quickly fell silent, giving her space to continue. They say I was born deaf." She took a breath, looking down, then up at the faces watching her with awe. "But the truth is, No one heard me say. My ear hurt. Her words were broken, imperfect, full of stops and tremors. But they were her words, her truth shaped for the first time by sound, by courage, by pain, finally named. The ballroom filled with emotion, eyes watering, hands pressed to mouths, hearts swelling. Helena wiped her tears openly. Jake blinked his away. Sophie turned to him, voice soft as trembling thread. He helped me. He listened. Jake sank to his knees beside her, overwhelmed. Helena rose and faced the audience. Tonight, in honor of Sophie and the many children who go unheard in the noise of our world, I'm announcing the launch of the Willing Hands Foundation. The audience leaned forward. It will fund second opinion screenings, support families navigating misdiagnosis, and advocate for safer, more careful NICU practices. And it will also sponsor emergency infrastructure repairs in children's hospitals, because one man showed me what it means to take responsibility even when no one is watching. She looked at Jake with deep gratitude. The foundation is named after him. The applause began slowly, one pair of hands, then another, until the entire ballroom thundered with it. Sophie jumped slightly at the volume, unsure if it was too loud or too exciting, but Jake steadied her hand with his. "It's okay," he whispered. "They're cheering for you." Later, after interviews and photos, after the lights dimmed and the last of the guests filtered out, Helena found herself walking with Jake, Sophie, and Max down the quiet beach behind the resort. The full moon painted the waves with pale silver strokes. The tide hissed across the sand in a steady rhythm. Sophie stopped suddenly, eyes wide. She turned toward the ocean, tilting her head. A faint rumble, soft, deep rolling, reached her still sensitive ears. She pressed one hand to her chest, the other reaching for her mother. "Mama," she whispered. "It's loud." Helena knelt, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "That's the ocean, sweetheart." Sophie took a step closer to the water. "It talks." "Yes." Helena whispered, her voice thick. "It always has. Now you can hear it." Sophie looked up at Jake, pointing at the waves with pure wonder. "Say." Again, Jake crouched beside her, letting the water wash over his boots. "That sound," he said gently, "is life. It's the world telling you you're part of it." Sophie beamed a smile so radiant it eclipsed the moonlight. She pressed herself into Helena's chest, then turned and hugged Jake too, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice shy, uneven, but clearer than ever. Jake pulled her close, voice thick. "You're welcome, kiddo." Max groaned dramatically beside them. "Dad, I think she likes you more than me now." Sophie giggled, a sound none of them had ever heard but instantly fell in love with. Helena looked at Jake, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, hope, affection. Blooming slowly like dawn stretching across dark water. "Because of you," she said softly. "My daughter didn't just hear the world. She taught me to listen again." Jake looked out at the waves, breathing in the salty air, the warmth of family settling around him like a long-missed coat. "You know," he murmured, "miracles don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes, they're just people willing to look a little closer." Helena smiled, real, unguarded, full of new beginnings. Sophie pressed her ear to her mother's chest suddenly. "Mama," she whispered, "your heart, it's loud." Helena's breath hitched. She cupped the back of her daughter's head. "It's loud because I'm happy," she whispered. "I've never been this happy." Jake watched them, emotion pulling tight in his chest. Max nudged him. "Told you, Dad. Some people are worth the noise." Jake laughed softly. "Yeah, buddy. They really are." The family, once fractured by silence, stood together as the tide whispered against the shore. And in that gentle chorus of waves, laughter, and a newly awakened heartbeat, their story didn't end. It began. Sometimes the most powerful miracles are not the ones that change the world, but the ones that change one life. Sophie's journey is a reminder that every child is speaking in their own way, even when the world labels them, overlooks them, or misunderstands them. and it only takes one person, one moment, one act of courage to turn silence into possibility. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to take a moment and reflect. Have you ever witnessed something similar, an overlooked detail, a quiet cry for help, a life transformed because someone finally listened? If you have, please share your story in the comments. Your experience may be the encouragement someone else needs today. And before you go, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? We have an incredible community here, people from all over the world, and your presence truly matters. If this story brought you hope, healing, or a moment of peace, please consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next journey we share together. Your support helps keep these meaningful stories alive. Thank you truly for spending your time with this story. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for being part of this growing family. Until the next story, take care of yourself and keep listening with an open heart.